The No Nonsense Roundtable. It's a weekly show broadcast on Rochester, New York's 50,000-watt iHeart radio station, News Radio Wham 1180. The host, Dom Geneva, interviews guests from all walks of life, all with amazing stories to tell. What you are about to hear is a recording of a previous broadcast with limited commercials. Now, here's host, Dom Geneva.
This is Dom with a note about today's show. I'm proud to say that I recorded a show with David Cay Johnston. David Cay Johnston was a reporter for the New York Times. He won a Pulitzer Prize. He has written 3 books on Donald Trump, and somebody that if you don't know, you should know. But along with that, he might have opinions that you like and maybe opinions that you don't like. That's life, and that's what this show is all about. To present to you people and give you a perspective of what they're all about. So listen, keep an open mind, and it's a great show.
Welcome, everybody, to another edition of your No Nonsense Roundtable. I'm Dom Geneva, your host, every Saturday right here on News Radio Wham 1180. And if this show is about people that you know and you need to know more about, and people that you don't know that you should know, the guest I have on my show this afternoon is somebody that maybe fits in the category of both, depending on how much you follow politics and investigative reporting. And fellow's name is David Cay Johnston. And David Cay Johnston, you are of all the people I've had on the show for these 300 and something shows, you're one of the most distinguished, I have to say. You're a Pulitzer Prize winner, investigative reporter. Have been all around the world and written some wonderful books, and one of them has to do with Mr. Trump. So
actually, three and a half of them have to do with Trump.
Okay, 3.5 have to do with Trump. So I stand corrected, and I have to tell you, it's an honor to have you on the show. I know you just came off of a lecture that you gave at the Osher Lifelong Learning Center that my wife arranged, and she shared your contact with me, which is very unusual because she usually keeps these close to her vest. And welcome to the show.
Glad to be here.
Well, you know, I have a silly little question that I like to ask people just to get people kind of in the mood of thinking a little outside the box. Now, you're a journalist. You've been a journalist as a career, a Pulitzer Prize winner. What did you want to do when you were 10 years old?
Well, I don't know at 10. When I was in junior high school, it's in my junior high school book that I was going to become an LAPD homicide detective.
Okay.
And I applied to join the LAPD through something called the Khaki Officer Program. When you were 20 years old or 19 years old, if you qualified, you were hired basically as a clerk in the police stations. You wore a khaki uniform, and if things went well, you then went into the academy, and as close to your 21st birthday as possible, you graduated and became a cop. And what happened instead was that I started writing for a little traditional shopper newspaper, the kind they used to throw once a week on your porch.
Uh-huh.
And my work got very widely noticed. The NBC-owned radio station in San Francisco, which was the dominant radio station there at the time, one morning I'm driving along in my car and they're reading my story on the air and they're going, "No, why aren't we reading this in the Chronicle? Why isn't this in the San Francisco Chronicle? It's in the, where is Aptos?" And then this other guy on the show says, that's down in Santa Cruz County. And they're having a great time reading this. And when I was 18, I was recruited by the San Jose Mercury. The next opening that they had on the staff, I was 19. They hired me, to the horror of some of the staff. What are you doing hiring a 19-year-old? I made the front page in a couple of weeks. I solved my first of several murder cases when I was 21. And it paid better than being a cop.
Yeah, and probably the physical requirements weren't the same as being a cop either.
No, I would have had to go through. I would have been okay, but I would have had to go through the police academy, and for 6 months at LAPD, that's pretty rigorous.
So you wanted to be a homicide detective, and you started writing for. This is sort of like the local penny saver. Is this what this was?
Yeah, that kind of thing. There was a guy who owned a daily newspaper. He sold it for millions of dollars and retired about age 40, and he quickly got tired of playing golf all the time. So he started this little paper to be busy.
Uh-huh.
And the very first meeting I was sent to cover, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm a high school kid.
Yeah.
There's a meeting of the school board, and they hand out a press release that next year property taxes on the average Santa Cruz home worth $34,211 will go up by $43.09. Dutifully reported in those words in the local daily.
Uh-huh.
I looked at it and went, that's useless. I mean, what if you own a $25,000 house or a $50,000 house?
Yeah.
So I just turned the press release over and divided and wrote that your property taxes will go up by whatever is $1.40 per $1,000 the county government says your house is worth.
Uh-huh.
And we got letters to the editor. And as the publisher told me, we're a shopper. We don't get letters to the editor. And pretty soon after I did a number of stories like this, one of the reporters at the Santa Cruz Sentinel came to me and said, I don't understand how you're doing this, but you have to stop. It's causing me problems. And of course, I had no intention of stopping his problems. And so I end up, I'm 19 years old, and I'm on the staff of what is now the sixth biggest newspaper in America, the San Jose Mercury.
Uh-huh.
As I said, I made the front page, and I don't know, it took me, I think, 8 weeks maybe to make the front page.
And what was the name of the publication again?
The San Jose Mercury.
The Pulitzer Prize this year is going to the San Jose Mercury by some 16-year-old kid or 15-year-old kid.
Well, I didn't get any Pulitzer Prizes back then, but
I know. I'm just teasing.
But they were, they were very happy with my work, and I had the good fortune that I was in a bureau on the San Francisco Peninsula.
Uh-huh.
The guy who sat immediately next to me later won a Pulitzer Prize for bringing down the Marcos regime in the Philippines without ever leaving. When you saw those huge crowds protesting Marcos that led to his downfall, and they all had white papers in their hand, those were reprints of his coverage in the San Jose Mercury of all the property he'd found in America that the kleptocratic dictator had bought. The guy who sat one desk from him, Robert Lindsay, became the West Coast bureau chief of the New York Times, a job he held for, 17 years, who did the nonfiction books, The Falcon and the Snowman, about the FBI agent whose son was a Russian spy and his buddy who was a falconer. And those books became excellent movies. And so he sat two desks away from me. The guy who sat on the other side of the room from me went on to spend many years as the head of the National Television Journalists Association. And so I just had this very good fortune that I was with incredibly talented people.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was 21, I guess, I'd been at the paper 2 years, I took over the bureau on the San Francisco Peninsula in Redwood City, which meant that I could do any big story that occurred in San Mateo County, the wealthy county right south of San Francisco, or sometimes in San Francisco. And so I got lots of great stories from doing that. And then I left. When I was 23 years old, got a 2-quarter, 5-month-long fellowship to the University of Chicago, where I studied doctoral level economics. And then I went to the Detroit Free Press as the first, and to this day, I believe, only investigative reporter in that state capital. And there were just tons of stories there. I won my first National Investigative Reporting Award for exposing a corrupt state senator. I caused a broadcast chain, TV and radio stations, to go out of business because they were putting up what we today call fake news. I called it manipulations and blackouts. And that's never happened any other time in the history of the United States. I'm the only journalist who's caused a corrupt television broadcast operation to be forced to shut down and liquidate. And there were a bunch of other stories. And then from there, I went to the San Francisco Bureau of the LA Times, which was sort of a dream job for me as a native Californian who'd grown up in Santa Cruz on the coast.
The question that I have about that is that, I mean, do you just have a natural ability to do that, an inquisitiveness, or is there courses you take to do this? How do you learn to be an investigative reporter of all things?
So I'm entirely self-trained. I did go to college for 8 years full-time while reporting full-time.
Okay.
And took, as I mentioned, up to doctoral level courses. But no, I just I was when I was in high school, I was married. I had a kid. I needed to make money, and I performed. And by the time I was 22 years old, with my own money, I bought a house. It's now worth $3 billion.
Yeah, I can imagine,
because it's in Silicon Valley. I wish I had kept it. But I was naturally inclined to be able to do this, and I was willing to work hard. And later I went to the Philadelphia Inquirer, the New York Times. That's where I won the Pulitzer Prize, and I was a finalist 3 other times. They named 3 finalists every year, and one of them gets the prize. And I was a named finalist 3 other times in addition to winning the prize. And and I've always, as is generally the case in my family, just worked very hard.
You're listening to the No Nonsense Roundtable. We'll see you after this. This is Dom Genova from Myers Creative. People get DNA tested to see where their ancestors came from, and that's all you get, where they came from. How about if you could actually have a video of past family? Well, you can't do that for the past, but you could do it for the future. John Myers can visit your home and video a professional and thoughtful interview for you to pass down to generations. Book one for yourself or give one as a Christmas gift to mom and dad to talk about their story. Or both. Go to lifeinterviews.com. This is Dom from my friend Jim Shelley and his Fanatics Pub and Blues Stage in Lima. We talk all the time about the great blues shows he has, and his patios open on weekends for free entertainment. Jim also has the Bills game on every Sunday. You can go there and watch the Bills in a setting that's more like, well, Cheers than a big impersonal sports bar. Exit 10, Route 390, go east a couple of miles and you're there. I'll be there. Come say hello. We're back talking with David Cay Johnston. He's a Pulitzer Prize winning reporter, once working for the New York Times and now teaching at RIT.
Well, that's the thing. I've had a lot of people on the show that say you have to have talent and you have to work hard to it. And my expression I use all the time, not everybody plays the piano can make music. Somebody's got a talent. You got a God-given talent for something. You got to find out what it is. So,
well, in fact, when I was in junior high school, I was very busy with roller skating. And one day somebody with an 8mm camera came and filmed the whole group of us who hung out at the Santa Cruz roller rink. And then they put up a sheet and broadcast, and projected the image on the screen. And there was a segment where I did an axel. That's a 1.5 jump.
Oh, yeah.
And it was the most graceless thing I have ever seen in my life. I mean, technically I did it, but I just looked at that and said, "You have absolutely no talent here." And I quit right there.
Yeah. I learned a skill in high school. It's called humiliation. It's called gym.
Yeah.
I couldn't do anything. So, let's get into the elephant in the room first. We'll go back to some of this now, but this is right after the election, and I want to get your spin on this, because what the hell happened? My Lord, I don't think anybody really saw that coming. And
no, and I'm on record. Yeah, I'm on record as saying that Kamala Harris would win this election by 10 million votes, and clearly I was completely wrong about that. The most important thing that happened in this election is the number of people who voted. We haven't quite counted all the votes yet because they have very slow vote counting processes in a couple of states. But essentially, in round numbers, 13 million fewer people voted in 2024 than in 2020. And we don't have a detailed breakdown on who they are, but in every presidential election in American history, the winner is, I didn't care to vote and didn't. No ballot. In this case, the no ballot group, though, grew about 8% compared to 2020. And that's the crucial factor in what happened in this election. Secondarily, nobody knew who Kamala Harris was more than 120 days ago, unless you're very involved in politics. And most Americans aren't. The majority of Americans cannot name either of their state senators or their congressmen. And so here comes Kamala Harris, who had a distinguished 17-year record as a courtroom prosecutor in California. She then runs for district attorney. Everybody tells you don't have a chance. There's 5 candidates. She wins. She puts in place a number of significant reforms designed to deal with cases that probably really don't belong in our criminal justice system and to divert them to other issues, because they're about juveniles who are in horrible home situations and then they get into something treated as a crime and drug courts and things like that. Then she gets elected Attorney General of California, and we had that banking crisis that collapsed our economy 16 years ago. And the bankers say, well, we'll give $5 billion to the state of California to distribute to people as punishment. And she goes, no, it's going to be $25 billion. And she got $25 billion out of them. She was successful in going after drug cartels and human traffickers and a bunch of other stuff, and is regarded in all 3 of these prosecutors' offices by people who work there as an excellent manager. And that's what the president of the United States is. He's a manager. Under our Constitution, he or she is supposed to do what Congress tells them to do. That is their job, to execute faithfully the office, and the duty of the office is to do what Congress tells you to do. Article 1 being Congress. She was an excellent senator. If you see the tapes of her questioning witnesses who are up for confirmation, you see her skill as a courtroom prosecutor. But nobody knows who she is. She's a woman. That doesn't help. And Donald did a really masterful job, as he always does, of creating what he wants to be reality. Donald, and by the way, I'm the first person who wrote about Donald Trump becoming president of the United States. And I wrote that in 1988, 36 years ago. I wrote about it again in 1992. And I assure you, people thought I was nuts back then. But Donald is hands down the greatest con artist in the history of America, if not the world. He's fantastic at it. And Donald is able to create his own reality. And I admire enormously his skill at this. And I say this as someone who, a lot of people have gone to prison over stories I wrote, con artists, tax cheats, others. A number of them got such long sentences, and they were not going to be prosecuted until I wrote about them. There was no effort plan to do so. Some of them got such long prison sentences, they died in prison. And Donald, his entire life has been a white-collar criminal. He lies, he cheats, he steals, he doesn't pay workers. He rails all the time about illegal immigrants. Well, Trump Tower was made possible by 400 illegal immigrants he hired, and they were so poor, they were living in the old Bonwit Teller department store, the wreckage of it, as they tore it down, not the way you normally do this in New York, with proper equipment. They were by hand, taking sledgehammers to knock the walls out. They were stripping wires with their bare hands, and they were living in this building in the middle of a New York winter when the temperatures were below freezing. And he refused to pay them until they took his project overseer to the edge of the 9th floor, leaned him out over it, and said, we're going to hang you from here if you don't get us paid. At that point, Donald said, okay, we're going to pay them. They lined up to get their cash. And sitting at the end of the table, once you got your money, was a mob guy. Yeah. And you had to give him part of your pay. And Donald's father, by the way, was business partners with a man named Willie Tomasello. Okay. Law enforcement reports, many of them, established that Willie Tomasello was a front for both the Genovese and Gambino crime families, the 2 biggest of the 5 New York City crime families. So the family has always dealt with mobsters. It's been their practice from day one. And when the big developers in New York, and Donald was never one of the really big developers in New York. He did a famous building, but he was, I was one of the 5 biggest developers. He wasn't even in the top 10. Um, when the big builders in New York went to the FBI and the Justice Department and said, you got to get these mobsters out of our pockets. We can't make a living. We can't do business. We can't build the city. Only one developer of any size didn't go along with that, and it was Donald Trump. Instead, he ran to the mob. So when there was a strike by the concrete industry, the union, the relevant union, the Teamsters being controlled by the mob, every concrete project in New York stopped. You were having them come pour a driveway for you, no concrete. You're putting up a building, no concrete, except one project in the entire city of New York, and that was Trump's Trump Tower, because he was in with the mobsters. And most people, they don't know this. They don't know that for roughly a decade, Donald Trump was partners with and did extraordinary favors for one of the biggest cocaine traffickers in America, Joe Wexelbaum, who was the personal pilot of his helicopter, the Ivana, named for his first wife, and who supplied his fleet of helicopters for his casinos. And Joe got arrested by the DEA. He had been importing drugs from Colombia, loading them into cars, sending them up to Cincinnati to be distributed. Joe confessed. He's a 2-time felon already. So he confessed. The drivers, the people, the mules, they just drove the stuff up to Cincinnati. They all got 20 years in prison. Joe asked to have his case transferred to New York or Miami, where he owned homes. And somehow his case ended up in New Jersey before a freshly appointed federal judge named Marianne Trump Berry, Donald's sister.
Okay.
Now she eventually removes herself from the case. It's called a recusal. But she had to explain to the chief judge why she was doing this. And what happened to Joe Wexelbaum, the ringleader? Did he get 20 years? Did he get life? No, he got 18 months. When he moved out, he moved into a multi-million-dollar Trump Tower apartment with no mortgage. He said he had no money to pay his $30,000 in fines. He wrote 3 checks for $200 each and then just quit paying. And he went back to work for Donald in the helicopter side of the business. Donald is not supposed to consort with criminals like this. And Donald wrote a letter to the judge saying, Joe's a stand-up guy. He shouldn't serve any time in prison at all. You should recognize what a great citizen he is. But if you read the actual letter, which is reproduced in my biography of Trump, The Making of Donald Trump, what it really says is, Joe, keep your mouth shut and I'll take care of you. And the clear evidence from all of that is Donald Trump was in the financial side, as many super rich Americans were, of the drug trade.
Okay. All right. So,
and by the way, everything I write about Donald, it's either from his and my direct conversations when I interviewed him, and I spent hundreds of hours with him, or I've got
28 years, right? You said
36
years.
Or it's from public records, which I link to in my books and elsewhere. All public records. There's no unnamed sources. There's no speculation sort of stuff. It's here's what the record shows.
We're taking a break, but we'll be back soon. This is Dom Genova from my friends at Jack Greco Furniture. Like I like to say, you buy a car every couple of years, you probably take your money and put it into furniture for, well, decades. Now, go someplace where they treat you right and they have good stuff. Not like these big box stores. Go to Jack Greco. And this is the end of the year. They have closeout savings on their outdoor furniture. Hey, the winter's not going to last forever. It's going to seem that way, but it's not going to last forever. Go see Jack Greco. Well, welcome back. We're talking with David Cay Johnston, a professor at RIT, who at one point was an investigative reporter for the New York Times and a Pulitzer Prize winner. He's written 3 books about Donald Trump.
So let me ask you the other question, your view of this thing, because there's been a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking by, David Axelrod and the Cajun fellow. What the hell is his name?
James Carville.
Yeah, James Carville. Yeah, I heard him this morning. It was a half an hour dissertation he gave on what happened. How did it seems like it's a surprise to the Democrat Party.
Well, I think it's a surprise to a lot of people. It was certainly a surprise to me. And I look back at it and I realized Donald has had a couple of very big successes. First of all, he has demonized honest journalism. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to say, "Oh, you work for the New York Times, you're a paid liar." People have no idea the incredible expense and extent that big news organizations go to get the facts right.
Mm-hmm.
I once was writing a feature about places where you donate your clothes and there's a charity that sells them, to show how they were being manipulated and ripped off. And an editor wanted something. And I said, "That's like a sentence in the story." And he said, "Yeah." I said, "It's going to cost $10,000. In today's money, it would be about $25,000.
Mm-hmm.
And he looked at me and said, "So what? Go do it." And I spent 2 weeks and about $10,000 of the New York Times money, the LA Times money, to go tie down what ended up being one paragraph, of which one was the setup and one was the sentence they wanted. Mm-hmm. Enormous amounts of time, effort, and money put into getting the facts right, because among other things, you don't want to get sued. And Donald has persuaded lots of people that you can only trust him. And he calls journalists the enemy of the people. We're the only occupation that the Constitution establishes is necessary under the Constitution in the First Amendment. That's one thing. Secondly, Donald, by getting people to not pay attention to the actual news and listening to him or places that are friendly to him, lots of people believe things that just aren't true. I mean, there are surveys showing large numbers of Americans believe we're in a recession. We're in the strongest economy in the world. The Economist magazine in Britain, the most sober publication on the planet, did a cover story. America's economy, the envy of the world. Nobody is doing as well as we are coming out of the pandemic. Inflation is now down to 2.1%. The Fed's target is 2%. And the post-war average, the last 75 years, is 3.5%. We got this bout of inflation, as did every other country in the world pretty much, because of the pandemic. And when it hit, we had a new administration, the Biden administration, and they had programs and policies that knocked it right down very quickly, very successfully. I've been on call-in radio shows, and people go, "You're just a liar." And I go look at the data. "Oh, they just make that up." I was just on overseas TV with one of Trump's surrogates who kept saying, "Well, they just make up the government statistics. They just manipulate." No, they don't. Big corporations depend on this data. It's carefully scrutinized by all sorts of people. And she goes, "Well, they make revisions." Yeah, they always make revisions. Back to the 1930s, they make revisions. Companies supposed to report certain data to the government. Well, the person who does it died or got sick or whatever, and so they get the data late, and they go back and they correct and adjust for this. Those are signs of integrity. So lots of people believe wrongly that the economy is in the tank and we're in trouble. The bottom half of American workers from 22 to 23, their pay went up 20% more as a share of what they were getting, 20% more than the top half. So it's just nonsense to say that the economy's falling apart and everybody's worse off. That's not, the numbers don't show that at all. And they show the bottom 90% are doing better than the top 10%. Donald then, turned this immigration thing and crime into another issue. People who come here without permission, people who are here illegally, or people who are here on what's called parole. They've applied for asylum. They haven't heard their case yet because there aren't enough judges. They are, as a class, far less likely to commit crimes than Americans. Can you find individual anecdotal examples? Sure. But overall, people are much less likely to commit crimes if they're not in the country. They don't want trouble with the police. They don't want to get thrown out. Donald picked a few horrendous cases and persuaded people crime is rampant. Crime in this country has been down decade after decade after decade. Crime in America in the 1920s was a really massive problem. It is not today. Your chances of being murdered in the U.S. right now are about 1 in 15,000. But if you live in New York City, which Donald keeps saying is just this sewer of crime, it's only 1 in 21,000. New York City is safer than America as a whole, despite Donald's constant denunciations of it. So fundamentally, Donald very successfully creates his own reality, and he persuades people not to listen to anything that contradicts what he says. And he repeats it and he repeats it and repeats it. And then he has one more technique that's very important. At almost every rally, he says, "We love you. We love the poorly educated." Well, the poorly educated and badly paid in America get dumped on by the culture. We have these TV shows celebrating people who own their own private jets and live in mansions. And we basically say to people who aren't rich, there's something wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with you. But the culture puts out these horrible messages. And people are resentful. And Donald very brilliantly exploits that to his advantage. He has no regard for people's lower incomes. In fact, in the 2016 campaign, he repeatedly said one of the biggest problems in America is wages are too high. So finding people voting for him because they say, well, my wages aren't high enough, is an indication that these folks don't know the facts. They're listening to him. Wages are too high. Long one of Donald's themes. So Donald is masterful at what he is. He's a con artist, and I respect him. Just like I spent many days with the number 2 hitman in the Western United States, learning about his life, and he was very proud of the 2 facts. One was everybody he killed was people who were in organized crime and broke the rules. So it was his job to go out and execute them. And secondly, that he'd never been arrested. And I spoke to police chiefs and detectives and FBI agents who verified everything he told me. And the astonishing thing was the police chief of one of the suburban towns in LA, who had been a detective, he said to me, "Oh, hey, how's he doing? I haven't talked to him in a long time. He's a fascinating guy." And they were all sort of taken in by this character. They all knew who he was. But he was really good at his job. He never got arrested. He didn't ever hurt anybody who wasn't part of this subculture. And in the same way, I have significant admiration for Donald's skill as a con artist. He's really, really good at it.
Well, but that compels the question, though. So, for every poison, there's an antidote. Or a way of putting enough neutral matter in there so it's not as effective. I mean, so what did the Democrats need to do to confront that reality as you describe it?
Well, first of all, don't try cyanide. There's no antidote.
Right. Okay.
That'll kill you right away. Before.
Yeah. Being an investigative reporter and wanting to be a cop that investigates murders. I mean, you would know that, I think. So. Tell me the question again. No, this seemed to have come in my mind, a lot of other people's mind, as a big surprise. It's like,
okay,
you wake up in the morning and you go, so what did they need to do when you have that? What should they have done that they didn't do?
So I think Harris ran an incredibly good campaign. She's a terrific manager. They had a huge ground game. In Pennsylvania, the supporters there said they'd knocked on, I think it was 900,000 doors. The UAW knocked on doors like crazy in Michigan. The same thing in Nevada. The only fault I would have with her campaign is that she should have spoken expressly and explicitly to men on a number of occasions. She did in the closing weeks of the campaign talk about reproductive health and women's bodies, and she would say women and the men who support them. So I think she turned off a lot of men, and that's what the voting pattern shows. Men by 13 points favored Donald Trump. Women supported her by 8 points. So that's the only flaw in what I think was a brilliant campaign. But I mean, did you know Kamala Harris before Joe Biden stepped back during the summer?
Yeah, from her, what was it, 4 years ago when she was debating Biden, and I was the little girl that you discriminated against. I remember that.
Okay, all right. But I mean, did you really know? I mean, but she didn't have what's called name recognition.
Correct.
When you watch your TV, the reason you see Flo and the gecko and the limu emu again and again and again and again is that the advertising business is built on the idea of repeating something so often you can't get it out of your head.
Right.
Whereas news is on the basis of, here's this new thing happened yesterday. That's the best word in news is yesterday, unless you can use today. And, oh, we did that. Now we move on. And it's not repetition. It's news. If it is a repetition, it's old paper, not newspaper. And most people don't pay attention to politics in America. Now, the Democrats and liberals often, I think, treat people who don't pay attention to Democrats with this polite phrase, low information voters, but they look down on them. And this is a complete change in development from the historic Democratic Party, which represented working people, tried to expand unions, et cetera. One of the best lessons in life I ever learned was when I worked at the Detroit Free Press, and I was in a little town out in the rural area, and there's nothing to do in the town. I went to a local bar, had a soft drink, and sat there at the bar. There was a baseball game on TV, and there was a play. And a big argument erupts among the customers sitting around the bar who all know each other about the rules in the play. And the bartender, who apparently owned the joint, pulls out the Major League Baseball rule book.
Mm-hmm.
It's about 160 pages, if I remember. I've got it somewhere in my bookshelves. And they find the rule and they debate it. And these people in the bar who were blue-collar workers, they, in fine detailed examined the play that had just taken place, the call by the umpire, and the rules in the book. These are not people who lack intelligence. They're just not interested in democracy and our government. They're interested in these other things. And so as a result, you could manipulate me about a baseball or football game because I don't pay any attention to commercial sports.
Mm-hmm.
I just, okay, the Bills won a game, the Bills lost a game. That's all I want to know. But that's how many people are about governance. And a lot of people will tell you Ralph Nader famously, there's not a dime's worth of difference between the two parties. And I said to Ralph, actually, Ralph, you're wrong about that. I'm of the view, by the way, that there is only one party in Washington, or has been for decades, and that's the party of the greenback. Mm-hmm. And it has a socially conservative wing and a socially progressive wing. It has one that, wants more control over who you are and less freedom. And there's one that says, no, we want more freedom and more options for people. But they're both there, put in office with money from well-to-do people. By the way, I have a reform for that. Why is someone in California allowed to donate to either Joe Morelli or his opponent's congressional election here in Monroe County? Mm-hmm. Why is somebody here in Monroe County able to donate to somebody running for office in Oregon? I think the reform we need is you can only raise money from people in the jurisdiction that you are running to represent. If it's New York senator from New York State, anybody anywhere in the Empire State. If it's a member of Congress or the state legislature, only within their district. And if you call a congressperson from Florida and say, I'm from Rochester, New York, they'll say, I'm sorry, we only talk to constituents. Click. Mm-hmm. If you don't believe me, call the Capitol Switchboard and try it. You might find somebody who will take your call, but as a general rule, they only talk to their constituents. But they take money from everybody.
We're going to pause now for a message or two. This is Dom Genova for my friends at Martin Ising Dry Cleaning in Fairport. Well, it's that time again. You're starting to wear long sleeve shirts. You got to schlep them to the dry cleaner and schlep them. Well, no, you don't. No, you don't. You do what I do. You call Martin Ising Dry Cleaning in Fairport. They pick them up and they drop them off, and they do a great job. Their Google rating is 4.9 out of 5. You can, oh my God, it's amazing. Their number is 425-4242. 425-4242. I use them. You should use them. Well, we're back talking to David Cay Johnston, a Pulitzer Prize winning reporter and fella that wrote 3 books about Donald Trump.
I heard a couple of comments. One was from Carville just this morning. I guess that he got recorded on Friday. He was saying that so when Kamala got on The View and they asked, what would you do differently?
Right.
Then, and he said she didn't throw Joe under the bus. He says, but you didn't win either. If you needed to throw Joe under the bus, you needed to throw Joe under the bus.
Well,
That's what he said. Not my words. That's what he said.
I understand. Here's the problem with that. If you're the vice president of the United States, you owe a duty of loyalty to the president.
Right.
I actually thought she pushed the envelope on this as far as she could. In the case of Gaza, and that's what cost her Michigan, the Dearborn, Michigan, which has the largest Muslim American population in the country, went for Donald Trump, despite his Muslim ban, his horrible comments about Muslims, et cetera. Mm-hmm. Because they clearly many voters there believe she would continue Biden's policies. Very clearly, she would not. I think she went as far as she could in saying to people, my administration will not be a continuation of the Biden administration. And then she would say, almost exactly what I've said repeatedly, by the way, is that Israel has every right to defend itself. It has every right to pursue the soldiers and the leaders of Hamas and Hezbollah and anybody else who attacks them, but they have no right whatsoever to kill children, the disabled, the elderly, women, to bomb apartment buildings and hospitals. No right to do that. And if she had become president, she would have put a leash on Benjamin Netanyahu on January 20th. Mm-hmm. She would have said, you're going to stop this mass slaughter over whatever the number is, north of 40,000 deaths, over 1,400 deaths. Many of them, majority of them, apparently women, children, the elderly, and the disabled. That's not appropriate. And that message did not get through. And so we have these anomalies. Donald's made many, many racist comments about Black people and brown people. And yet there's some clear evidence that substantial minorities of Black and brown people voted for Donald Trump this time more than in either of the previous elections. Most voting, the political science research that I have read over the decades, and I've made it a habit for years to read one academic article a week, because it's a great way to get a cheap education, shows that most voting decisions are emotional. They're not. But that's important because the framers of our Constitution, who are not the founders of the country, they're different groups of people, and only 20% overlap between the founding fathers and the framers. The framers of our Constitution believed very deeply in the principles of the Enlightenment, that there would be reasoned and rational debate. It might be robust, people might yell at each other, but they were going to reason through the facts. And that's not how it works. There's a class of Americans it works through, people who they live their lives in their heads. But for most Americans, that's not how they make decisions. You may recall when George W. Bush was running against Al Gore. You had this friendly, folksy guy on one side, and you had this stiff automaton on the other. And one of the comments back then was, well, who would you rather have a beer with? George or Al Gore? Well, but, there's no question about that. You'd rather have, and George Bush would walk back into the campaign plane. This was captured in a documentary by one of Nancy Pelosi's grown children, who's a documentary filmmaker. And there's almost identical scenes where George Bush steps back in the campaign plan and he goes, "Hey, Dom, how you doing? That grandchild, she born yet? Oh, hey, Slim," because he had names for everybody. Was his way of not having to remember all the names. He just put a character title on you. And then Al Gore appears in the documentary and he goes, "Hi, well, my staff says I have to take questions from you. So what do you want to know?" Yeah. Guess who got better press coverage?
Of course.
I mean, the reality is that one of them got better press coverage than he deserved, and one got worse than he deserved. So how people vote is not in line with the theory of democracy. Right. But another part of this, Dom, is
Yeah.
I have had better conversations about politics, culture, economics, the law with a random cop on the side of the road in Slovakia,
Uh,
a waiter in a little Austrian cafe up a dirt road in a forest, a person who randomly sat down next to me on the sofa in a Singapore hotel, than I have with American executives sitting next to me in the first class section on a coast to coast flight in their $4,000 suit. I mean, I've been appalled at talking to people who are MBAs or who lead a big section of a bank at how grossly uninformed and unthoughtful they are about matters involving governance, politics, tax policy. People in other modern countries are raised to believe you have a duty and an obligation to be involved in these things. And they do, much more so than Americans.
I totally agree with you. I'm not really well read when it comes to the founding fathers or whatever, but it was Thomas Paine who wrote Common Sense, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Correct.
And what I basically got from that was that our aristocracies really don't work because sooner or later you have an idiot in the bloodline. And you don't need to have an idiot in the bloodline. You can have an idiot elected.
Right.
Yes. And common sense was supposed to be a general consensus by the founding fathers that you would pick the person that was the wisest, not the person you liked the best, but whatever farmer or tradesman it was, that had the ability to have the qualities that you wanted in your governance would get elected. Not it didn't boil down to just mere popularity. And it's funny you should mention that Al Gore and George Bush thing, because I've been telling my children that ever since that debate. I go, you would rather vote for the fellow that you liked, regardless of what the qualifications are. I mean, that's the way human nature is.
Right. So I think there's some real challenges to our country. Now, there's another damaging issue going on to our democracy. The latest National Literacy Survey, which was done in 2019, so we'll get another one soon. Because of the pandemic, we haven't had one. Showed that 22% of Americans, that's more than 1 in 5, read at the level of a third grader or below. They are functionally illiterate.
Yeah.
And that reflects not the level of their brains, but the cheapening of education in America.
Mm-hmm. And
54% of Americans, that's more than half, read at the level of a sixth grader. That's an 11 or 12-year-old. 54% sixth grader. I don't care if you were the smartest kid in your class in sixth grade. You didn't know jack. You're a kid. You're 12 years old.
Mm-hmm. And
people don't have the ability. One of the reasons I think that newspaper reading has declined beyond, newspapers cost a tremendous amount of money to get home delivered now and things like that. But one of the reasons is that people don't have the reading skills. The number of books sold, what are called trade books, fiction or nonfiction, but trade books in America in 2023 fell by 2 million from 2022. You're talking about maybe 25 million books. I mean, it's a huge decline. And we're turning away from reading, which is the single most effective way to gather information. Now, 31 years ago, or 32 years ago, a Princeton sociologist named Camille Paglia wrote a book called Sexual Personae. And one of her observations in this book was that the Western society, America in particular, was what she called a mosaic culture. The Old Testament, you're not supposed to have graven images. You're supposed to have words. And that we were a mosaic culture in which people read texts. And she said what's been happening is we are becoming a pagan culture of the moving image.
Okay.
And there are literally high schools in America, including some teachers in the Rochester city schools. There may be in the suburbs too, I don't know, but in the city schools, who instead of having you read a novel like To Kill a Mockingbird, Billy Budd, whatever, instead they show the movie.
Oh, geez.
So if you and I read Lee Harper's novel To Kill a Mockingbird, your Atticus Finch is not my Atticus Finch.
Mm-hmm.
But if you see the movie, you get the pre-digested Gregory Peck version of that character. And novels are very important to have an appreciation of the other, to understand what motivates people, to appreciate the differences between us and the complex interactions of people. I'm not a lawyer, never taken a law school course in my life, but I taught law at Syracuse University College of Law for 15 years.
Really?
And my all students to this day come back to me and say that literally that the most revealing thing in their entire education was the session we would run where everyone was assigned a role, and I would have between 25 and 45 students in a class, to negotiate the rules for using dynamite in Manhattan construction in 1902, the year that there was an explosion while building the East Side subway system that killed a lot of people.
Okay.
And I would give them the actual rules that had been adopted. But the problem is, you're there to represent the banker with the loan on the property next door to where they're using dynamite. Somebody else is the fire inspector who has to go down in the hole and look at the dynamite to make sure it's properly placed. And if it's not right, you can get killed. And there's families walking kids to school on the street. I mean, every character you can imagine.
Yeah.
And they have to negotiate with each other to come up with a set of rules everybody can live with. And they suddenly realize, my God, the world isn't black and white.
Yeah.
And the interests of different people are very different. The insurance company, the Chamber of Commerce, the mayor, the person who's trying to put up the building, the guy who owns the dynamite company, who has magazines to store the dynamite. And what we've seen happen, though, in American politics is ever since Newt Gingrich said in 1994 that bipartisanship is political date rape. I don't have exactly quite right, but his point was that working with the other party is date rape, the political equivalent of it. There has been this my way or the highway stuff that's come. It's one-sided. It's on the right. The Democrats all the way through have been, we'll negotiate with you and whatnot. It's been one-sided, and it has gained traction over time. This hardening of this is the way it should be. So the guy who was the principal person behind Project 2025, this was the game plan for the new administration, Donald Trump, who originally spoke at a meeting to say, these are my people, they're going to write this report, it'll be the agenda for my administration, said during the campaign, I never met that guy, there's video of them together, never heard of this, I don't know what's in it, I don't want to know. And other times he would say, well, there's things in it I like, things I don't like, which is another contradiction. The guy who was behind this project has a book that becomes public and goes on sale on November 12th. And in it, he repeatedly uses the imagery of burning things down, turning them to ashes. And on one page, he has a list of what he wants burned down. The FBI, the National Institutes of Health, that includes the Center for Disease Control, that's part of it, and all the research we do that extends and saves people's lives. The New York Times, a whole host of other places. This is imagery that should be very troubling to people. And by the way, the day after the election, what did Donald Trump's longest advisor in the presidential role say, Steve Bannon? Well, of course we're going to now implement 2025. That was the plan all the way along. They lied to you during the campaign.
Oh, in all fairness, it's a 900-plus page document.
Yeah. And
some of it's been slightly misrepresented by some people.
Well, you could say that about anything. You say that about anything, Dom. Yeah. But I mean, let give me an example of how slickly done this was. The woman who wrote the section on reproductive health was on C-SPAN. They filmed an event she was at in which she said that we should get rid of all contraception because all sex should be consequential. Well, first of all, I don't think that's going to be a very politically popular movement, particularly among young people, if they know about it. But they say, she and others then say, we're not banning contraceptives. Well, that's true. But if you read the report, what they're saying is we're going to enforce the Comstock Act. That says you cannot move contraceptives. This is a law from the 1800s.
Mm-hmm.
You can't move any contraceptives by the post office or common carrier. Common carrier is a less than truckload trucking company or a rail car that's not exclusively owned by you. So let's assume that you're in the business of making IUDs and prophylactics, rubbers, and things like that. If you have your own fleet of trucks, you would be free to distribute these across the country. There's nobody who's going to have a big enough business in contraceptives to have their own fleet of trucks to deliver nationwide. So they effectively are seeking to end all contraceptives. That's one of the areas I don't expect they're going to follow through on. I can think of a million things that could happen. Are we going to go pass a law for every one of them? No, we're not going to do that. And let's keep in mind what Blackstone's great teaching, that is a foundational principle of criminal law. Better that 100 guilty men go free than one innocent man be wrongly imprisoned, lest no man have reason to obey the law. And I interviewed gang members in Los Angeles almost 40 years ago. And I would say to them, well, why are you committing some of the crimes you're doing? Because I get them to tell me about stuff. I mean, I get people I've had people confess to me about murder and how much their second mistress costs and all sorts of things. And different groups of gangs in different parts of the city would all tell me the same thing. Well, the LAPD is going to arrest you and throw you in prison and frame you anyway, so you might as well go out and do these things. That's exactly what Blackstone said. That if we're going to lock innocent people up, then nobody's going to have respect for the law. And we don't regulate everything. We don't put a cop on every corner. We don't put a cop in your bedroom, much as some people in America would like to do that. And so, let's focus on the actual issues. We have so many things we need to take care of in this country: education, scientific research, our infrastructure, the imprisonment of wrongfully convicted people, the execution of people who've been shown to be innocent, because we must preserve the finality of jury verdicts. Let's deal with real issues, not one that was ginned up by policy entrepreneurs trying to make a meaningful existence for themselves and make a living.
I agree, and I think that's the point I'm trying to make with the 2025 document allegedly saying that they want to do away with birth control. I think that's exactly. I think that's exactly to your point. I mean, we have other things to worry about other than people thinking that we're going to do away with birth control, because I don't see that happening.
Well, I agree with you. I think that is unlikely to happen, but you're going to have a group of very serious ideologues. The people who wrote 2025 are serious ideologues. The person who was the editor and inspiration of the book, who Donald Trump endorsed, he wants to burn down the FBI and the National Institutes of Health and the Education Department and the New York Times, and a long list. I mean, it's almost a half a page long list. So you're dealing with people who do not respect differences of opinion, which are crucial to democracy. They're authoritarian in their nature and approach to these things. They propose things which will cause enormous collateral damage. And so we do have to pay attention. And throughout the campaign, Donald Trump lied about Project 2025, even though he had endorsed it at the beginning, and it was written by people who are his people. Many of them were his appointees or advisors. And he's mentioned, I think, 300 times in the 900 pages. I've read most of it. I haven't read every word of it, but I've read most of this thing. And people should read it. It is a very scary document.
What you said about
live in a free society.
Expand, if you would, on burning down the FBI. What specifically? Burning down the FBI? What does that mean?
Well, Donald and a number of people have all said that the FBI should be eliminated. That we need to get rid of the FBI.
Well,
the FBI has two major.
That's not in the 2025 report. The 2025 report talks about taking the gutting the administration of the FBI and putting more people, more investigators and agents on the street rather than having this big bureaucracy.
The FBI doesn't patrol the streets. They're not on the streets.
But
the
investigative.
What the Project 2025 proposes is that all federal employees who, and we're talking about the civil service people, not the 4,000.
My dad was civil service.
All federal employees who have any role in making policy have to take a loyalty test to the president. That's as Stalinistic as it gets. The Project 2025 people have been quoted in recent days as saying they expect somewhere between 50,000 and 500,000 people. There are about 2 million federal employees, a little under 2 million federal civilian employees are going to be fired. And if you turn the FBI into an organization whose job is to investigate Donald Trump's enemies, whose job is not to be independent to pursue in their professional judgment those crimes because we can't pursue every crime, we never have, then what you're doing is you're creating something that isn't that much different from the police state investigative arms that we've seen in Iran under the Shah and under the mullahs today, that we see in Russia, North Korea. I mean, this is not law enforcement. This is intimidation and control by a president who, remember, Donald Trump says, I have an Article 2 that I can do anything I want. That is not what Article 2 of the Constitution says. Donald, whom I've known for 36 years, Donald is very, very clear. He believes he is the only person fit to be president. Frankly, I wouldn't be shocked if Donald said, yeah, I should run the whole world, because Donald in his own mind believes he's special. And you'll notice he gets sometimes really highly competent people to work for him for a while. And then they either quit or he gets rid of them. And then what does he do? They're stupid. Kamala Harris, he's stupid. None of these people are stupid. He's the one who is ill-educated.
Let me ask you a very frank question.
Yeah.
The 2025 report, have you read it all?
Yeah, I have not read every word of it, but I have read a great deal of it.
How much of it have you read?
600 pages of the 900.
Okay.
I've ignored some sections that I just, they're not relevant to anything.
Well, one of the things they want to get rid of the Department of Education. There's some things in there that I would imagine, since it was written by an outside consulting firm, that somebody would subscribe to some of it and not subscribe to other parts of it. I can't imagine that. I can't imagine that because somebody purported that they want to do away with contraception is any more valid or accepted by people than other people saying that abortion at 9 months is
the question
acceptable.
To ask, Dom, the question to ask about that is, why is Donald Trump taking advice from people who are espousing such extreme anti-democratic, anti-freedom views? And what does that tell you about Donald?
Well,
one more important fact, Dom, to understand. Donald has said many, many times on the record all over the place, you shouldn't be allowed to write things about me unless I approve of them. Or usually what he says is that I don't approve of.
Right.
That's what dictators do. That's what people like Putin do. You write something that he doesn't like, you find yourself in the gulag. That's not American democracy. That is dictatorship.
I totally agree. I totally agree with that. Well, it has been delightful talking to you because what's really great is when two people can get together and you can have a spirited discussion and nobody's calling anybody names. I had that happen just on this. I just happened to have this online this week that I disagreed with somebody and they started calling me names. When you start calling me names, you gave up any authority for me to listen to you whatsoever.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what the comments are from your audience.
Yeah, I know the demographics of my audience. Obviously, this is a talk radio station. It's 50,000 watts, as you know. Right. You're a Rochesterian.
Right.
I am very apolitical. I am not a Democrat. I am not a Republican.
I'm not either, by the way.
I think that the problem with this country, and having a marketing background and an MBA in marketing, okay, one of the things is that there has been a movement from a general consensus, which I think the founding fathers were depending on, to a combination of niche marketing, which is combine different factions to get to 51%. This group has nothing in common with that group, other than they don't like this person. So you get a number of people together, you get your 51%. These people don't have anything to do with those people, but you put them together, you get 51%. And I think that's what the problem is that there's, common sense, common sense, no nonsense. It's a rare thing, I guess. So I'm so thankful for you. I appreciate it.
All right, take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. Tune in every Saturday from 10 to 11 on News Radio Wham 1180. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll make more.